September 11, 2001 started like any other late summer Tuesday on the East Coast. Clear blue sky over Manhattan. Rush hour traffic. Commuters pouring into the World Trade Center, the twin 110-story towers that had defined the New York skyline since the early 1970s. Nobody watching the morning news had any reason to think this day would be different. Then, at 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 slammed into the North Tower at roughly 490 miles per hour. For a few confused minutes, news anchors called it a tragic accident, a small plane, a navigation error. That illusion lasted exactly 17 minutes. At 9:03 a.m., live on national television, a second airliner, United Flight 175, banked hard and tore into the South Tower. There was no more ambiguity. America was under attack, and the entire country was watching it happen in real time. Within the hour, a third plane would hit the Pentagon, and a fourth would go down in a Pennsylvania field. By the end of the morning, nearly 3,000 people would be dead, and the United States would enter an entirely different era of its history, one shaped by fear, surveillance, and 2 decades of war. The attacks were carried out by 19 men organized into 4 teams, all linked to al-Qaeda, the terrorist network led by Osama bin Laden. The plot had been more than a year in the making. The lead hijacker, Mohammed Atta, had trained as a pilot in Florida flight schools, blending into American life while quietly preparing for mass murder. Aviation security in 2001 was nothing like it is today. Cockpit doors were flimsy. Box cutters and small knives were legal carry-on items. There was no coordinated system flagging patterns across multiple simultaneous hijackings. American Airlines Flight 11 took off from Boston's Logan Airport bound for Los Angeles, chosen specifically because the cross-country route meant the plane was loaded with tens of thousands of pounds of jet fuel, turning the aircraft itself into a weapon. Minutes after takeoff, the hijackers stormed the cockpit, killed the pilots, and Atta took the controls. Air traffic controllers noticed the plane deviating wildly from its flight path and radioed the military. Fighter jets scrambled from Otis Air National Guard Base, but they launched too late. By the time F-15s reached New York airspace, Flight 11 had already struck the North Tower. 18 minutes after the first impact, United Airlines Flight 175 executed the same plan. It, too, had launched from Boston, headed for Los Angeles, packed with fuel. 5 hijackers led by Marwan al-Shehi overwhelmed the crew and seized the controls. Passengers on board had time to realize what was happening. Several placed frantic final calls to loved ones, describing a hijacking already underway. At 9:03 a.m., Flight 175 banked into the South Tower at an angle, exploding through multiple floors in a fireball visible for miles. Now the entire country understood, this was not an accident. This was coordinated, deliberate, and far from over. Inside both towers, evacuation became a race against fire, collapsing stairwells, and elevators that no longer worked. On the highest floors, above where the planes had hit, thousands of people found themselves cut off entirely, with smoke filling the stairwells and no way down. Firefighters were already climbing up as office workers fled down, passing each other in stairwells that would soon become tombs for hundreds of first responders. The rooftop doors, many assumed would offer helicopter rescue, turned out to be locked, and thick black smoke made any air rescue impossible anyway. While the towers burned, a third hijacked plane was already in the air. American Airlines Flight 77 had departed Washington Dulles for Los Angeles with 4 hijackers aboard, led by Hani Hanjour, a trained pilot who had struggled to land a job with commercial airlines in Saudi Arabia. By this point, air traffic controllers across the country knew hijackings were underway and were issuing warnings to every carrier in U.S. airspace. It didn't stop what came next. At 9:37 a.m., Flight 77 struck the Pentagon, the headquarters of the U.S. Department of Defense, killing everyone aboard along with 125 military and civilian personnel inside the building. A flight attendant and a passenger, television journalist Barbara Olson, both managed brief phone calls describing the hijacking in its final minutes. For the first time in American history, the nation's own military headquarters had been attacked on home soil. Meanwhile, U.S. airspace itself was being shut down entirely, every commercial flight in the country grounded, international flights diverted to Canada. Fighter jets patrolled major cities. The scale of what was happening was still unfolding in real time, and nobody yet knew whether more attacks were coming. The fourth plane was United Airlines Flight 93, bound from Newark to San Francisco, another long-haul flight loaded with fuel. It departed later than planned, already delayed on the tarmac, which meant that by the time hijackers seized control, passengers had learned via cell phone calls about the two towers and the Pentagon. They understood exactly what fate awaited them if they did nothing. What happened next became one of the defining acts of courage that day. A group of passengers, aware they were likely doomed regardless, voted to fight back. Todd Beamer's phone call to a GTE operator ended with words that would become a national rallying cry, "Are you guys ready? Let's roll." Passengers stormed the cockpit. The flight data recorder, the only one recovered intact from all four flights, confirms a violent struggle took place in the final minutes. The hijacker piloting the plane deliberately rolled it and drove it into a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, at over 560 miles per hour, killing everyone aboard. Investigators believe the intended target was the U.S. Capitol or the White House. Because of those passengers, it never got there. By 10:30 a.m., both towers had collapsed, the South Tower first, at 9:59 a.m., followed by the North Tower at 10:28. A third building, 7 World Trade Center, weakened by falling debris and fire, would collapse later that evening. Lower Manhattan was buried under a gray-white cloud of ash, pulverized concrete, and smoke that would linger for weeks. Firefighters, police officers, and paramedics rushed toward the danger while everyone else ran from it. 343 New York City firefighters died that day, along with dozens of police officers, the largest loss of first responders in American history. Off-duty firefighters cut vacations short and drove back to the city, digging through the wreckage by hand for survivors, then for remains, 4 months afterward. Some of the most haunting images from that day were of people trapped on the highest floors who chose to jump rather than face the fire. Media outlets initially broadcast those images widely, until public outcry pushed networks to stop, one of the rare moments where public pressure visibly reshaped what television was willing to show. When the dust settled, the final toll stood at 2,977 victims, office workers, tourists, restaurant staff, firefighters, and everyone aboard all 4 planes. Within hours, investigators had a head start nobody expected. Mohammed Atta's checked luggage never made it onto Flight 11 due to a missed connection, and inside it, the FBI found documents identifying all 19 hijackers, along with details tying them to al-Qaeda. By evening, agents had names, nationalities, and financial records. What emerged was unsettling. These were not desperate, uneducated men. Many came from middle-class or wealthy families and held college degrees. This was not the profile investigators expected from suicide operatives. These men had trained for over a year, learned to fly commercial aircraft, and lived quietly inside the United States while preparing an attack estimated to have cost al-Qaeda between $400,000 and $500,000 to plan and execute. Several of the hijackers had already crossed paths with U.S. intelligence before September 11, flagged at a January 2000 al-Qaeda summit in Kuala Lumpur, tracked by foreign intelligence services who alerted the CIA. The information existed. It simply never connected into a single, actionable picture in time. That failure, the inability to connect scattered warnings into one alarm, would become one of the central findings of the federal investigation that followed. To understand why this happened, you have to go back 2 decades, to a wealthy young Saudi named Osama bin Laden. Born into one of Saudi Arabia's richest construction dynasties, bin Laden could have lived a life of total comfort. Instead, in 1979, he traveled to Afghanistan to join the Mujahideen fighting the Soviet invasion, a war the United States itself helped fund and arm through the CIA's covert Operation Cyclone. Bin Laden emerged from that war a hero in much of the Arab world, credited with helping defeat a superpower. In 1988, he founded al-Qaeda. His break with the West came in 1990, when Saudi Arabia invited American troops onto its soil to counter Iraq's invasion of Kuwait. Bin Laden saw the presence of U.S. forces near Islam's holiest sites as an unforgivable violation, and he said so publicly, putting him at odds with his own government. Exiled first to Sudan and then to Taliban-controlled Afghanistan, Bin Laden spent the 1990s building al-Qaeda into a global network, issuing public declarations of war against the United States, and orchestrating earlier attacks, including the 1998 bombings of U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, and the 2000 bombing of the USS Cole. September 11 was not the beginning of this war. It was its culmination. The American response was immediate and total. Within weeks, U.S. and coalition forces launched the invasion of Afghanistan, targeting the Taliban regime that had sheltered Bin Laden and al-Qaeda's training camps. It would become the longest war in American history, not ending until 2021, 20 years later. At home, the country transformed just as dramatically. Congress passed the USA PATRIOT Act in October 2001, granting federal agencies sweeping new surveillance powers over phone records, financial transactions, and private communications, a trade-off between security and privacy that remains fiercely debated to this day. Airport security was rebuilt from the ground up, reinforced cockpit doors became mandatory, liquids were restricted, shoes came off at checkpoints, and a new federal agency, the Transportation Security Administration, was created almost overnight. In 2003, citing intelligence, later proven false, that Saddam Hussein possessed weapons of mass destruction and had ties to al-Qaeda, the United States invaded Iraq. No such weapons were ever found. The war would drag on for years, cost trillions of dollars, and remain one of the most contested foreign policy decisions in modern American history, its justification unraveling in the years that followed. Osama bin Laden evaded capture for nearly a decade, reportedly living in a fortified compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan, not far from a military academy. U.S. Navy SEALs killed him there in a raid on May 2, 2011. His body was buried at sea within 24 hours, a deliberate choice to prevent any burial site from becoming a shrine. Most of the plot's other key figures were eventually captured, including Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, described as the operation's principal architect, who remains held at Guantanamo Bay to this day, his case still unresolved after 2 decades. Today, the site of the World Trade Center holds one of the most quietly powerful memorials in the country, 2 enormous reflecting pools set into the original tower footprints, the names of all 2,977 victims inscribed around their edges. It isn't a monument to victory. It's a monument to absence, a reminder of how quickly an ordinary Tuesday morning can become the day that redraws a nation's sense of safety. 25 years on, the questions raised that morning, about intelligence failures, about foreign entanglements, about the true cost of the years of war that followed, are still being argued over. What nobody argues about is the debt owed to the moment itself, 3,000 ordinary people who never got to finish an ordinary day.